had ever set his foot upon this silent coast. I was nonplussed, and then for the first time there crept over me an intuition of the truth. Here was no sign of war. As far as this portion of the Devon coast was concerned, that seemed to have been over for many years, but neither were there any people. Yet I could not find it within myself to believe that I should find no inhabitants in England. Reasoning thus, I discovered that it was improbable that a state of war still existed, and that the people all had been drawn from this portion of England to some other, where they might better defend themselves against an invader. But what of their ancient coast defences? What was there here in Plymouth Bay to prevent an army landing in force and marching where they wished? Nothing. I could not believe that any enlightened military nation, such as the ancient English are reputed to have been, would have voluntarily so deserted an exposed coast and an excellent harbour to the mercies of an enemy. I found myself becoming more and more deeply involved in quandary. The puzzle which confronted me I could not unravel. We had landed, and I now stood upon the spot where, according to my map, a large city should rear its spires and chimneys. There was nothing but rough, broken ground, covered densely with weeds and brambles and tall, rank grass. Had a city ever stood there? No sign of it remained. The roughness and unevenness of the ground suggested something of a great mass of debris hidden by the accumulation of centuries of undergrowth. I drew the short cutlass with which both officers and men of the navy are, as you know, armed out of courtesy to the traditions and memories of the past, and with its point dug into the loam about the roots of the vegetation growing at my feet. The blade entered the soil for a matter of 7 inches, when it struck upon something stone-like. Digging about the obstacle, I presently loosened it, and when I had withdrawn it from its sepulchre, I found the thing to be an ancient brick of clay baked in an oven. Delcarte we had left in charge of the boat, but Snider and Taylor were with me, and following my example, each engaged in the fascinating sport of prospecting for antiques. Each of us uncovered a great number of these bricks, until we commenced to weary of the monotony of it, when Snider suddenly gave an exclamation of excitement, and, as I turned to look, he held up a human skull for my inspection. I took it from him and examined it. Directly in the centre of the forehead was a small round hole. The gentleman had evidently come to his end defending his country from an invader. Snider again held aloft another trophy of the search, a metal spike and some tarnished and corroded metal ornaments. They had lain close beside the skull. With the point of his cutlass, Snider scraped the dirt and verdigris from the face of the larger ornament. "An inscription," he said, and handed the thing to me. They were the spike and ornaments of an ancient German helmet. Before long we had uncovered many other indications that a great battle had been fought upon the ground where we stood. But I was then, and still am, at loss to account for the presence of German soldiers upon the English coast so far from London, which history suggests would have been the natural goal of an invader. I can only account for it by assuming that either England was temporarily conquered by the Teutons, or that an invasion of so vast proportions was undertaken that German troops were hurled upon the England coast in huge numbers, and that landings were necessarily effected at many places simultaneously. Subsequent discoveries tend to strengthen this view. We dug about for a short time with our cutlasses, until I became convinced that a city had stood upon the spot at some time in the past, and that beneath our feet, crumbled and dead, lay ancient Devonport. I could not repress a sigh at the thought of the havoc war had wrought in this part of England at least. Farther east, nearer London, we should find things very different. There would be the civilization that 2 centuries must have wrought upon our English cousins as they had upon us. There would be mighty cities, cultivated fields, happy people. There we would be welcomed as long-lost brothers. There would we find a great nation anxious to learn of the world beyond their side of 30, as I had been anxious to learn of that which lay beyond our side of the dead line. I turned back toward the boat. "Come, men," I said. "We will go up the river and fill our casks with fresh water, search for food and fuel, and then, tomorrow, be in readiness to push on toward the east. I am going to London." Chapter 2